Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Visitors Book Program. We are very honored and privileged to have Dr. Norman Borlaug with us. Dr. Borlaug won the Nobel Prize in Peace in 1970 for his pioneer work in bringing about green revolution. Earlier on, he's got his education in Iowa and went to school there, got a BSc degree, and later on an MSc degree in forestry and a PhD in plant pathology and in genetics. Soon after that, he joined the Rockefeller program, a cooperative program with the Mexican government, which was primarily aimed at developing new strains of wheat so that they can cope with the challenges of food and hunger in developing nations. He has received nearly 40 honorary degrees from different universities, and I think it's fair to say he's been described as one of the greatest benefactors of humanity in this century. So we're really very honored and privileged to have you. We're very warm welcome to Pakistan.
Thank you.
Let me start, Dr. Borlaug, by asking you a question. You've been often described as a man who's committed to a cause, and the cause is to fight hunger, to develop food security. In thinking back, in your childhood and youth, what is it that particularly motivated or inspired you to sort of take up this challenge and to make it a cause in your career and in your life?
I think it was the economic chaos that followed the collapse of the stock market in 1929, when I was just beginning my high school career. All the local banks went broke. The farm families often who owed money to their bank lost their land. There were foreclosures. There were auction sales of private property, the livestock. It was chaos, unemployment everywhere. This was when I was just beginning my high school. And then my first visit to a large city was to Minneapolis. And it was during the time when there was all kinds of chaos, social chaos, unemployment, people sleeping on the streets at night in September, October, November, when the oncoming winter. People asking for 5 cents. It was all of this misery and poverty that made me want to do something that was useful to humankind in general.
So it's just seeing that misery and seeing the poverty that motivated you. Now, in thinking back again, your first visit to Pakistan was in 1959 or 60.
60.
Was there any specific reason that you thought of Pakistan as a country suitable to start or bring this quiet revolution from Mexico to Pakistan?
At that time, my work in Mexico was finished. I had turned over to my young Mexican colleagues whom I had trained, turned over the responsibilities for the wheat program, and I was looking for a job elsewhere because that was the one attempt that the Rockefeller Foundation was making to see what could be done. And then someone in the New York office, I think it was Dr. Al Mosman, said, "First, I want you to make a trip across all of North Africa, the Near and Middle East countries, to see if something that you learned and the materials you developed in Mexico and wheat might be useful elsewhere." So in 1960, I started this tour in late January and finished it in mid-May, visited all of those countries in North Africa, including Egypt, and then all of the other countries, the whole way to here in Pakistan and in India.
So it must be, now that it's 40 years ago you came to Pakistan first. So I wonder if you look back now, and as we all do, you analyze the factors that you feel were responsible for the success of Green Revolution in Pakistan. Are there any specific things that come to mind now, 40 years later?
Yes, several things, Mr. Nasim. In the first place, it was the spirit of that group that were trained in that period. On that trip across North Africa and through the Middle East, a decision was made, and in my report to FAO, I said that there was a real shortage of trained people with a focus on the heart of this food problems, production problem, in many of these countries. There were only 2 countries that had a fairly good number of well-trained agricultural scientists at that time, Egypt and India. The other countries, as I perceived it, needed many more trained young people, especially those with a focus on the heart of the production problems. And this was included in the report. I said that I thought there was a need for this training. I hope that the Rockefeller Foundation would put up money for training scholarship, and that FAO would pick the best young people receiving their first BS degrees from their national universities and send them to me so that I could train them in all of the disciplines that bear on wheat production, namely in genetics and plant breeding, plant pathology, entomology, agronomy and soils, irrigation, and then as best we could, I was still pretty young, on policy. And this came to be. And I said that FAO should select someone to select these young people, to send them to Mexico, if we could get the funding. And if the Mexican government permitted me to use the program which I had developed, which was now in their hands as a training ground for these. And it came to be an international yield test in which the best Pakistani Indian varieties, the best Canadian, US, and Mexican, Argentina, Chilean, Brazilian varieties were included in comparison with many of the new Mexican wheat. And Dr. Hafiz, who showed us all around this country in 1960, was about a year and a half later selected by FAO to coordinate this. And from that came the new group who came to Mexico for 8.5 months, returned. They grew all of these nurseries. We could see the adaptation and the resistance to especially the most difficult disease, stem rust. And so as the hunger grew, we put on large numbers of demonstrations, first in Pakistan. And Pakistan was the first country that really committed itself to pushing this program. And this was after many hundreds, maybe thousands of plots were put on farmers' field with the best variety, the best date of planting, the best fertilizer practices, the best control of weeds and irrigation as the data then present permitted. And the results were fantastic, but nothing would have happened because there was lots of resistance at many levels.
That is always the case.
Always. Yes. You know, when you move in your government status upward after 20, 25 years, you get to the top, you don't want to risk something new. It might go wrong, then you will be charged. And so these were problems.
The fear of failing and
fear of failing. It's widespread. It's present everywhere. I sometimes with the new things I say, maybe that's dangerous. We all do it. But more,
you took the risk and you took the initiative.
And then we were fortunate to have people like the Minister Malik Kudabak Bucha, who came out to see the plots, saw the farmers' fields, saw their enthusiasm, and through him the message got to President Ayub Khan. And once they made the decision,
it worked. Now you come back to Pakistan.
That recommendation went to the Planning Commission, and that was put into operation. In 1966, the seed was already imported, and in 2 years, Pakistan became self-sufficient in wheat.
Now this present visit of yours, you come back to Pakistan after how many years? 10, 12 years?
I was here 3 years ago,
3
but
years ago.
briefly.
But I think now you visited several laboratories, and specifically the Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, which is the major national sort of institution in agriculture. What are your impressions in general, the way they're trying to cope with different problems that the country faces? And I think more specifically, some of the suggestions that you feel would be helpful in developing strategy for the future.
Well, first let me say that today I have had the pleasure of visiting the National Agricultural Research Center with the wonderful new facilities. And over the last several days I have visited both the provincial and some of the national research centers. And I've been well pleased with the quality of the work that's going on. But I do feel that the government has not committed itself to funding adequately the research program. Unless that is done, we fall further and further behind on the new technology that we need to cope. For example, as I recall, when the new technology was introduced in '65, wheat production was a little over 4 million tons here in Pakistan. Then it jumped in about 10 years to double to 8. And then in another 10 years, doubled again to 16. And it's gone up. This year it will probably be something on the order of 19 or 20. But population has grown, demand for food. And so Pakistan shouldn't be ultra complacent. It has to face the new challenges, more food, and to do it on less land per capita. And so it requires new technology, it requires adequate budgeting. I think that too much of the total budget is spent in salaries, not enough in operating funds. Maybe I shouldn't say too much in salaries. There's not enough operating funds to permit the scientists to be as effective as they should be by visiting more, spending more time on farms, closer communication between the research and the extension and the farmer.
Well, I think this is very reassuring to see that you impressed with the facilities. The question of funding has always been there. I mean, developing countries in general, very little money for science. There are things that need to be done and so on. Now, let me sort of bring you now to the future. As you know, a great deal has happened in the last 2 decades in terms of plant molecular biology, plant genetics, transferring gene. You sort of take one gene and put it somewhere else and so on and so forth.
And you can reach a long distance and bring a gene.
You can bring genes from outside and so on. But in this new sort of era of biotechnology and genetic engineering and molecular biology, I know that the people in NARC and others are very conscious of these things. But how do you view, in terms of future strategy, I'm just wondering that this experience with CIMMYT, there were a lot of international agencies that got involved. So do you feel that a similar effort, in this new area could perhaps be also useful in taking the sort of example from Green Revolution and now work on what one calls the gene revolution with cloning and all those things?
My own feeling on agricultural development and food production is that it's a continuum. Sometimes the slope is upward, then it drops a bit, but it has to be a continuum built on the foundations of the previous knowledge. The new knowledge, the new techniques are applied, and that gives it another thrust, another push upward. And my feeling is that for the short term, things can be done to increase wheat production. Too much wheat is planted too late, so that then when the temperature shoots up in the end of March or in April, the crop that's late planted is pushed to maturity too fast. The grain is shriveled. It cuts yield. We need to try to correct that. There are various devices of cultural practices, new machinery. All of the attempts should be made to cut that. There are a lot of other problems. But also, looking toward the more long term, we need this new technology. I don't like to call it GMO, genetically modified organism.
Yes.
That's a poor term because Mother Nature was modifying organisms before man started to do that. So I prefer to call it biotechnology or genetic engineering, transgenic
plants and crops and whatever.
Crossing of material. During my career, we could not reach out. It had to be a cross between closely related species of wheat. But now you can reach out across genera, families, even plant kingdoms, and take a gene out of animal kingdom, out of an insect, and put it into a wheat plant or corn plant, especially maize plant, or into cotton to control certain insects. These are new technologies that we need for the future, because when I was born in 1914, there was 1.6 billion people. Now we have passed 6 billion, and we add 90 to 95 million more every year. Many people are very concerned about the environment. They don't want us to use technology to destroy the biodiversity, the wild plants all around about us, including in the forest. So, therefore, we should try to concentrate our food production on the land and in the soil and climatic conditions that are favorable for agriculture, and leave undisturbed these other marginal areas for wildlife habitat, for protection against flooding and erosion, and for forestry and wildlife. That's the way I see it.
I think with someone with your experience, with having been in this for so long, although I think it's difficult to sort of categorically say is one pessimistic or optimistic about looking into the future. The challenges are there,
yeah.
And obviously the developing countries will have to develop their own strategies in dealing with these problems. But I'm really pleased to learn that your own view is that one has to go into in an aggressive fashion,
yes.
With the research, that the research obviously needs to be given more support, more funding. And I think in Pakistan in particular, after this one example of our success or whatever in the nuclear field, we've always argued
exactly.
that once funds are made available, that there is a potential for agricultural revolution. And that really, I think people have to eat before they can begin to fight and so on.
Exactly.
So that I think is a crucial point. Now, in general, I mean, I think, is there anything specific that you would like to add to what you already said in terms of strategies? Because I'm sure viewers all over look to a person of your caliber.
Well, there are many other components that have to be put together to make your ongoing, not only production of wheat, but of cotton, of paddy, rice, all of the other crops that are important. And I especially feel strong that you have to do something about oil seeds, because you're importing more than $1 billion or something like that of oils, edible oils. And I think that that can be speeded up. But in the case of wheat, by getting those varieties that are available, planted on time, the breeding program that's ongoing is a good program. The linkage between research and extension still is not as good as it should be. More of the research people have to work closely with the extension people, especially in agronomy. Agronomy is crop management, and it is the most neglected field, not just in Pakistan, everywhere in the world. It's neglected. It's not as sophisticated as genetics and plant breeding or new biotechnology or entomology or plant pathology, plant physiology. But it's the things that puts all of those factors together that affect yield and productivity. And then at the proper time, it should be in a position to convince the political leaders that technology applied will do much to increase production. Now, even though I was trained, mostly a plant pathologist and geneticist, I was an agronomist because of the way I grew up on my father's soil and farm, and then I complemented this with study of crop science and agriculture and crop soils to give me this. But I was doing that when I think the agronomist of today who's prepared for the integrated crop production should be doing that. And he or she, they don't have the proper support. And this is something that needs to be corrected. But research in general is not receiving the support, not just in Pakistan. This is a world problem. The U.S. is guilty of the same thing. All of this food abundance and the land saved for other purposes, they have forgotten. Remember there that the agricultural sector has not very much political clout today. Less than 2% of the total population is on the land. And it's my experience that a person who has left the land, one generation, they have no idea of agriculture. They think it's easy. It's not easy.
But I think obviously then the emphasis is on linking the research to the farmers in the fields. Thank you very much once again. Let me sort of try and wind it up. Firstly, by saying that there is a very wonderful book, Norman Borlaug, World Hunger, which was edited by Anwar Dil, who's a Pakistani living there. It has many of your thoughts, many of your childhood memories. I think it's been a very pleasant and very useful experience for us to talk to you in the studio. I hope that some of the suggestions that you make will in fact be listened to, that more money will become available, and I think especially the leading institutes like the NARC in Park and other research institutes will get the necessary support to cope with the problems that the country faces today. Thank you very much.
I would just like to interject that Pakistan has the potential to produce the food of the basic crops it will need from here till the year 2025. But the potential has to be converted to reality. You can't eat potential.
Well, Dr. Borlaug, thank you very much. I'm sure all the viewers must have enjoyed the conversation and the things that you mentioned. We are particularly grateful to you for making a lot of suggestions. As you know, Pakistan essentially is an agricultural country. Almost 80% people in this country are farmers, and therefore there's a great deal of interest in this field. Obviously, there's a great deal of emphasis on this, and organizations like NARC, which are one of the leading institutes in the country, would look forward to sort of having your recommendations implemented in terms of greater support at several levels, in the sort of more communication between the researchers and the farmers, so that we reach out, using you as a role model, as a man who sort of grew up on a farm, learned the agriculture, went to Mexico, developed strains, brought in a green revolution, the whole lot of things. You certainly are a real role model in this kind of approach. I'm sure that we look forward to be seeing you again in Pakistan, that in you we have a great friend, someone we have greatly admired, and it has been a real pleasure for all of us, the viewers and everybody, having you with us. Thank you very much.